Let's dive into relationships and codependency. So, in this lesson, I would like to discuss codependency, and then we're going to switch gears and go over counterdependency as well as interdependency. So, the issue of codependency is a major element for many of our clients, whether it is directly expressed as a codependency issue or not. Codependency affects not only individuals, but it can also affect family and friends. And there are several ways in which codependency can be described, but in essence, it is regarded as a dysfunctional pattern of living that leads one to overreact to things that happen outside of themselves and underreact to things that happen inside of themselves. So, as a way of achieving and maintaining a sense of self esteem, it is usually necessary to engage in compulsive behaviors and to rely on the approval of others to reach a sense of self worth in order to cope with their codependencies. Now, codependents put all of their efforts into caring for others, but they neglect to make sure that they take care of themselves, especially emotionally. Codependency can be traced back to addictions, especially alcoholism, and we are just now realizing that a codependent needs as much care as a dependent partner. Well, in the past, we just focused on the alcoholic, the one that had the drinking problem. And when it comes to codependence, I have seen how these behaviors or these coping mechanisms persist throughout their lives. Codependents rescue people from their responsibilities. They like to take care of people's responsibilities for them, but then later they're going to get mad at them for what they did to themselves. They feel used and sorry for themselves, and their partner is addicted to some chemical, and then they are addicted to the chemically dependent partner. Now, a lot of the times for codependents, I'll hear things like, everything is going wrong with my relationship. I know that it's all my fault. I try everything I know to fix it, but it just doesn't work. Or I'm just so confused. Most codependents usually share very similar stories. They feel responsible for maintaining relationships. Now, in hindsight, currently, there's just no official diagnosis for codependency, and there is no diagnosis entitled codependency as there is for other addictions, such as chemical dependence. Now, this does pose a problem for many professionals as there is just no distinct set of criteria for which to assess an individual. However, usually many of the following symptoms are present with this disorder and are readily seen in a coaching session. And it can be assumptions of responsibility for meeting other needs, anxiety around separation issues, enmeshment in relationships with chemically dependent individuals, or even constructions of emotions. Sometimes you even have depression. Now, we must keep in mind that codependency is a very complex concept, and it is possible that a codependent may not display all of the above listed symptoms of codependencies. Now, codependency is used to describe the person who becomes the caretaker of an addict or a troubled individual. An individual may be addicted to alcohol or drugs, gambling, relationships, it doesn't matter. Codependence can be this individual's spouse, it can be their lover, their child, their parent, their sibling, their friend. A codependent person is one who has let another person's behavior affect them and who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. Now, codependents tend to personalize all that happens around them, seeing everything as being directly related to them. They have difficulties trusting their own perceptions, and they view themselves as failures when they cannot control everything or meet everyone's expectations. They fear rejection and abandonment, so they feel that they must be involved and needed in every aspect of the lives of others. And not being involved and needed is going to equal abandonment to them. They like to take care of people's responsibilities for them. It is in this fashion that a codependent person is literally dependent upon others. And codependents believe that they must be the center of all activities. Oh, you're unhappy. Well, what did I do? It's often heard from codependents. Let's just say if someone in their family is angry, Codependents are convinced that they caused it, and they tend to personalize everything. So in their self-centeredness, they will, they become meddlers. They believe that they can and should be able to fix anything, and then they tend to be very controlling. They also are just not in touch with their feelings. So this causes codependents to have unrealistic expectations of themselves and are unable to accept their own limitations. They have difficulties defining their own boundaries, who they are or who they are not. They cannot distinguish between what is their own responsibility and what is the responsibility of others. Now, people who have no boundaries tend to personalize everything that happens around them and see it as directly related to them. They become over involved and over responsible. So, since codependents feel that they have no and strict meaning of their own, almost all of their meaning comes from outside of themselves. They are almost completely extremely referenced. So, codependents need to learn what it means to have a self. Now, I have had some clients, well, this one particular client who was a codependent, and he shared the emptiness in his life as he said, "When I look in the mirror, I see nothing." He didn't know who he was. Codependents constantly tend to have low self esteem problems. As is true with many codependents, they try to fulfill the expectations of others. And it's just at the same time, they just don't know what they want to do or who they want to be. They live for others and not for themselves. So when codependents do things for others that the other person needs to do for themselves, the codependent is attempting to make themselves indispensable. It is through this action that they believe their life will have meaning. They are taken care of, and in doing so, they facilitate another dependence on them. Now, this is what we call caretaking. Codependents often think and feel responsible for other people, their feelings, their thoughts, their actions, choices, wants, needs, and ultimately, it can be even their destiny. They feel anxiety and pity and guilt when other people have a problem, and they try to anticipate other people's needs. So, when working with codependents, they'll frequently say things like, "I was just never good enough," or "no matter what I did in my family or what I did in my family or in school, it just never seemed like it was enough." Now, this shows the commonness of low self worth found amongst codependents. They tend to attack themselves for what they think and feel and look, act, and behave. They reject compliments and praises or any type of positive feelings about themselves by others. They just feel total rejection. Now, a lot of codependents tend to ignore problems or pretend that they aren't happening, and they often don't feel love and approval from their parents, and therefore, they don't love themselves either. So it just makes sense why they can't love others when they don't feel the love or approval from their parents. They feel that if they weren't alive, there wouldn't be any problems. So if someone asks them if something is wrong, they respond with something like, "No, everything is fine." They're just not aware of how they feel. They are only aware of how others feel. And a lot of the time, they're just not aware of what they want. They tend to ask what others want, and they often get confused when someone else is confused. And they may just get angry when someone else is angry or feel happy when someone else is happy. You guys get the gist of where I'm going with this. This is just taking on the other person's emotion. Now, this applies to other expressions of feelings as well. This is just a major aspect of the disease of codependencies. It's a lack of boundaries. Now, a codependent is just always striving to be a good person, and they actually believe that they can control others' perception of them, and their lives are just structured by questions. What will others think? They are insecure and have such low self esteem that they must depend on others to prove their worth. To put it in a single term, they are just people pleasers. And at the same time, codependents work hard. They are so intent on taking care of others and keeping things going and surviving that they just often develop stress related functional and psychosomatic diseases. They don't complain, but they're more, they do more than their share. They do whatever is asked of them. They please people, and then they try to do their work perfectly. Codependents are often just very responsible people. So when codependents are not able to please, they believe that they are personal failures, and they try to hide the fact that they cannot meet everyone's expectations. Because there is a concept of the, let's say, in codependence, you have an emotional pursuer and then you have an emotional distancer. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of codependence that you may see in a coaching session. Now, guys, in many marital relationships, one of the partner is an emotional pursuer and the other is an emotional distancer. Now, these are just generalized terms. These are not fixed personality characteristics. Everyone has both parts in some degree within them. This is just also a generalization, but often women are pursuers and men are the distancers. Now, there is a continuum between these two aspects. On one end is a movement towards people, and the other is a movement towards object. Now, the pursuer that values movement towards people is overly responsible and tends to take on most of the responsibility for maintaining a relationship. And then the pursuer is often impatient and emotional, and the here and the now are important for her. She wants to talk about toxic issues over and over. If she is not relating to her partner, there is a real sense of emptiness within her. So, on the other hand, the distancer values movement towards things, is under responsible, and often waits and is slow to act. He tends to be cognitive. He has little interest in communicating personal thoughts and feelings. In fact, he is just often unaware of his own feelings and thoughts. He is most often relaxed when he is alone. Now, stress causes a change in a relationship where the pursuer moves after the spouse more actively because she needs connection with the partner. And when the pursuer wants connection, the distancer sees this as an attack. But at the same time, the distancer hides because he needs space. Now, when this happens, the pursuer sees this as rejection. Through this process, both partners in a relationship are more clearly differentiating themselves. However, they are moving in opposite directions and their needs are basically in conflict. Now, with some understanding of the dynamics involved between these two types, both partners in this kind of relationship have things that they can do to improve their relationship. The pursuer needs to give her partner more space and time to think and respond, and she needs to be less intense. At the same time, the distancer has a need to be more present and available to talk with his partner and take more responsibility for the relationship. Now, one important aspect is the difference between reacting and responding. So, one example is a married couple that I coach, and of course, I believe in confidentiality. So, I just did some made up names. But the husband, Sean, he was a cheater, and his wife, Sandy. Now, Sean was a quiet man who said, if his wife, Sandy, yells, I just back away. If I'm late and I don't call her, it infuriates her. I feel like I just always need her permission and approval. Now, Sean has issues that needed to be dealt with, but I, at that time, wanted to focus on his wife, Sandy. She was the domineering and controlling. She often just would not let him finish a statement before she jumped in and completed his sentence or went on to some other subject. She called herself what we will consider a mothering type. She just had many expectations of Sean. So when I first met with them as a couple, he was just very quiet. And Sandy, she did most of the talking. She would just often interrupt Sean if he did say something. She was impulsive and often reacted emotionally to what he had to say or what he didn't have to say. She just always wanted to know, what he was thinking, where he had been, and what he had been doing. She was basically over involved in many aspects of her partner's life. Now, my task with Sandy was to first get her to see how much she was taking charge of their interaction. And then I wanted Sean to see how much he let Sandy control their interactions. So I ended up meeting with Sandy separately a few times, and we worked on getting her to just slow down and think before she spoke and learn to just give him a chance, Sean, a chance to speak voluntarily. And after practicing for a while, she successfully, I'm so sorry guys, she successfully was able to slow herself down and be more composed instead of just blurting things out. And as she was able to give up some of the control, this allowed her partner Sean to enter into the conversation and not be cut off. Now, I did work with Sean separately as well, and I did help guide him on taking more initiative and responsibility for the relationship. So, in the end, this did lead to more constructive interactions between the two. We had, I believe, it was about a couple of 11 sessions to work on that. And by the end of that time, both Sandy and Sean were calmly responding to one another instead of impulsively reacting like they had in the past. Both partners were just starting to identify what was their responsibility and what was their partner's responsibility. So, as I stated earlier, guys, it's just very difficult to articulate and define codependency since, again, there's no diagnostic criteria that exists. And to some degree, every person is codependent. It is just not possible to just make a clear distinction between being entirely healthy, which we would consider not codependent, and being codependent. So the amount of codependency in any one person deals with is on a continuum, which on one extreme, being entirely non codependent, which nobody is, and to the other extreme, which is entirely codependent, again, which nobody is. Now, healthy people are just somewhere in between all of that. And any one person is just continually changing his or her position. So, depending on the circumstances or the time of day or the person who's being related to, they may exhibit some codependent like behaviors. But what we will not call them are, we're not going to call them just flat out codependent, because sometimes you have one person who is more codependent with a spouse than, say, with a friend, or that person is less codependent out in public, but more so in the home environment. So, therefore, instead of calling someone codependent, I believe that it's just more accurate to say he or she is either now exhibiting a great many codependent behaviors or they're not exhibiting them. So on another day, maybe they're exhibiting less codependent behaviors. Now, therefore, the degree of codependency again is just continually varying.